Phoenix Splash TV. Sometimes I'll get a particular question that has a very long answer. I'll get asked, why is it that I talk about Japanese musicians? Now, if you've kept up with my channel, then you might notice that I talk a lot about music, and many of my discussions about music has to do with Japanese rock and Japanese music in general. While it's true that many of my requests are Japanese composers and musicians, I'll often do a video on someone who isn't Japanese, like my Kurt Cobain video, or my video on the Smiths. But there's an actual reason to why I talk about Japanese music, and it has to do with something that has been bothering me for quite a long time now. Now, before we begin, I have to let you know that I am in no way a weeaboo. There are many things about modern Japanese culture that I just can't stand. While it's true that I like a few animes like Death Note and Cowboy Bebop, as a whole, I just can't stand anime. I'm not a huge fan of kawaii either, and it's kind of a shame that that side of Japanese culture gets the most attention. Which gets me into why I started talking about Japanese music. I read a lot of books on music, from when I was studying it in college to even just casually reading something. In the music world, Japan gets overlooked a lot. For instance, in a textbook about the history of music composition, someone like Ryuichi Sakamoto is never mentioned. Meanwhile, the composer for Legally Blonde has a whole paragraph. Ryuichi Sakamoto was not only just a classical composer, but he revolutionized a lot when it comes to MIDI and computer music. He composed for the Olympics and for many award-winning movies. Ryuichi Sakamoto should be in every book that revolves around composers. But what you'll find is that he's not in any, or at least not in very much. This is the main reason why I decided to talk about these musicians. They did a lot for music in general, and it's constantly ignored. And honestly, I get kind of fed up with it. Now, if you're like me, then you might ask yourself, why did they do this? Is it racism? Well, the short answer is yes, but it's a very strange form of racism. Because I'm not talking about the Confederate flag and all that SJW stuff, I'm talking about something that's entirely different. Because when I say music history ignores Japanese composers, I don't mean that it ignores Asian composers. Chinese composers and musicians get their piece of history just like a European musician would. Every music textbook has Yo-Yo Ma in there somewhere. In fact, most of my textbooks from college had several sections of Chinese musicians and composers. Of all the Asian countries, China gets represented pretty well within music. The reason I boil it down to racism is because the Chinese still seem to hate Japan, or at least resent Japan anyway, and China has a huge influence on many things that we see today, believe it or not. And just to let you know that this is just my personal theory based on what I've read and what I see within the music history world. I remember I got into an argument over the whole casting of the Ghost in the Shell movie. I was on the side that they should have casted a Japanese or at least an Asian actress. Now, I know that the character is an android, and that's where the argument kind of centered around, but I still felt that the film wouldn't get so much backlash if they did cast an Asian actress. But they went with Scarlett Johansson. Even the new Death Note movie that's due to come out is completely Americanized, or as some seem to call it, whitewashed. Now, you can argue that anime characters are made to look like white people, which is ridiculous, especially for Death Note, because Westerners are drawn differently. But I have a reason that totally lines up with the Japanese composers not being mentioned in textbooks. If Hollywood wants to sell a film in China, then the film cannot have Japanese actors. Or at least the main actor that's on the poster cannot be Japanese, otherwise the movie might not sell. Now, there's no solid evidence on this in any way, shape, or form, but it's just an interesting thought. I was kind of bummed out that I never got to study Japanese classical composers in college, unless it was on my own terms, and I will admit that this doesn't apply to the percussion world where marimba player Keiko Abba is held in high regard. I guess you have to innovate an instrument to have a place in music history, but even then she still isn't mentioned in other textbooks that aren't percussion. And that's pretty much what I have to say about that. Now, you don't have to believe what I say, and I'm not telling people to petition or to do anything about this. This is just an observation I kind of made. On top of being a fan of Japanese music in general, I feel that it isn't represented well in music studies. Even one of my instructors, who went to a really established school in London and had a doctorate degree, had no idea who Ryuichi Sakamoto was. And I know that I'm probably not the best person to be doing this type of thing. I mean, if I had my way, I'd get publishers to get them in textbooks rather than just having a YouTube video. But to my surprise, Japanese musicians do pretty well. I mean, just compare them to my other videos and you'll see a big difference. So, what do you guys think about this subject? Keep in mind that it's just a theory, and I think it has some groundings. I mean, there's articles about racism in China that are starting to sprout up these days. So yeah, if you have a thought, leave it in the comments below, and thank you guys for watching. This is Josh the Music Man, signing off.